Hey, it's therapist and relationship coach Micah Ross, and this is the How to Talk About It podcast. Have you ever wondered if your sex drive is normal? Maybe you couldn't care less if you ever had sex again. Or it seems like maybe this is how your partner feels. At least 33% of women say they have lost interest in sex. And if I'm thinking about the girls' nights out that I've had in the last, decade, I think that number might be a little higher. Differing sex drives are a huge source of conflict, misunderstandings, and hurt feelings in relationships. It's just so easy to take this topic personally when it's not deeply understood. Dr. Laurie Mintz, who I've looked up to for a very long time, you'll hear in the beginning of the podcast, she's an author, professor, licensed psychologist, and sex therapist, is joining us today to answer questions like, where has our drive gone? What can we do about it? How the heck do we talk about this with our partners? Should we be scheduling sex? Having duty sex? Should we be faking it? Dr. Laurie is seriously one of my idols, and being able to chat with her today was a dream. If this subject stresses you out or makes you sweaty just thinking about it, please know, don't run away yet. Dr. Laurie is wise and entertaining, and I hope she will help you feel more ease about this not so easy to talk about subject, and that you'll leave this podcast feeling more accepting of yourself. Maybe, just maybe, you're not broken. Okay, hi. Would you prefer if I called you Dr. Mintz, Laurie?
How about Dr. Laurie? How does that sound?
Love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Laurie Mintz is here with us today to answer all of our questions about drive, which I feel like in my practice working with couples quite a bit is just a source of so much misunderstanding, miscommunication, misperception, and it's so emotionally laden. I feel like nobody knows how to talk about it. We were just talking. You were teaching at Mizzou when I was in undergrad. I knew of you then. Your classes were difficult to get into. No matter how quickly my fingers moved, I couldn't get in on those registration days. We somehow were connected in some way when I was in graduate school through a mutual connection. You hugely helped me not just professionally help people, but you helped me in my own life and marriage at a time when my husband and I's sex drive was just, when I had small children, I couldn't make sense of what was happening, and I felt so much shame. And your books helped me make sense of a whole lot of stuff that didn't make sense at the time and helped us reframe a whole lot of hurt feelings and find a path forward. So I really want to say thank you. You've been so influential and helpful to me personally, but you've helped me help so many people.
Oh, you have no idea how much that means to me because, that's why I wrote the books that I wrote. That's why I do what I do, is because to help people. And to think that I could help someone who's another therapist, and that just really speaks to how little we learn about drive and human sexuality. And that includes therapists in training. It includes physicians. And so that just means the world to me. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, well, and I was trying to think this morning, what did I leave graduate school with in terms of drive? I remember learning about Masters and Johnson's work. I remember learning about the functions of what's happening physiologically when we have sex or when we orgasm, but I don't know that I learned anything about drive and the differences between men and women and so much that I feel like we need to know.
Absolutely. Well, you learned more in grad school than I did because no one uttered the word sex when I was in grad school. Not a word about it. And a lot of programs still don't. And it's such an important part of life and well-being in relationships. And the fact that in our training it's ignored is just, it's really it's very upsetting because the result is a lot of therapists can't serve clients the way that is needed.
Right. Okay. So first I want you to define, what's your definition of drive when we talk about sex drive?
Okay. So, that's even a complex question right to start, right? So, because when we think of drive, right, we think of hunger or thirst or something. Without it, we're going to die. And that's not true of sex, right? It might be uncomfortable. and frustrating, but nobody's going to die due to lack of sex. So it isn't really a drive in the usual biological way we think of it. So what I like to think about it is an interest in sexual activity. And you might be about to ask this, so should I? There's two types of drive, but I can stop there and or go on.
It's interesting because when explaining men's drive to women, I will use analogies about hunger, especially with moms. Like, it's like being pregnant and hungry and not having a granola bar in your purse. It's that, yes, we're not going to die if we don't get sex. I think sometimes my husband might feel that way.
Right. And it's, let me continue the hunger metaphor. It's so interesting because this just came up with the other day. So there's two types of drive. One's the one we hear about. It's spontaneous sexual desire or drive, desire. Let's call it, I like to call it desire, right? So spontaneous is, ooh, I see somebody attractive. Ooh, I'm just suddenly interested and I'm horny, basically.
Yeah.
And that is the one that only the lay public knows about. And it's one that occurs in our youth mostly and early in relationships. And it's also a very male drive as well. I'm not saying women don't get horny, but as we age and as our relationships go on in stress, we kind of do stop getting horny. And a lot of people say, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my relationship? And that drive is akin, if we're going to use the metaphor of hunger, it's like your stomach is growling. You want to eat because you feel something physiologically. And in fact, that is actually, we call it desire, but it's actually the beginning stages of arousal. We're lubricated, our skin's a little tingly maybe. It's a biological feeling. Then there's another type of drive called, some people call it responsive desire, some people call it receptive desire. I always get mixed up, but it's when we have no physiological, like our stomach's not growling metaphorically, right?
Right.
But we think.
But we could eat.
Yeah, we think, right. Except we think, if I eat, it might taste good. Or if I have sex, it will feel good. I'll feel closer to my partner. And a lot of times I see so many women who have sexual encounters based on that, and they call it duty sex. And I say, no. If it's fun, it's not duty sex. It's like, metaphorically, I was literally just talking to a reporter in Germany, and I was explaining this, and it's so funny, the hunger thing. She said, oh, I get it. In Germany, we have a saying, if you eat, you will feel hungry. And it's like, yes, that's it. And it's like reversing the equation. It's having sex to get horny rather than waiting to be horny to have sex.
Yes, and I have that on my list of things to talk about. It's something, it's a way that I've heard drive described recently that I don't, either I haven't heard it before or it's, just now registering for some reason. But just that for women, drive is more reactive, and for men, it's more spontaneous.
Yeah, and that's and especially for women, as we age and as our relationships age, we feel less and less horniness. And when I talk to women who say, I could care if I never have sex again, but the problem is my husband still cares, which I hear that all the time, it's breaking it down. What do you mean, like you never feel horny anymore? Like, and it's a really different scenario for someone who doesn't feel horny but has sex, and the touch leads to the desire. The arousal leads to the desire versus someone who engages in sex and doesn't enjoy it. That's a whole different problem.
Right. Well, and it's such a complicated topic. And it seems like what starts the issues on this subject in a relationship might not be what the presenting issues are by the time they get to my office. And so it feels like it's always a lot of unraveling of a lot of layers.
And so what causes the diminished spontaneous desire? Is it simply age, an age of a relationship? Is it stress? Built up resentments? Because, I mean, there's some really interesting biological neuroendocrinology research coming out showing that women who do more than their share of the household and chores, like, it's not that they just are too tired and resent their partner. Like there's some biological changes that happen with chronic caregiving and chronic stress that have us decrease physiological desire.
Yeah. So in your book, Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex, this is my well-worn copy that I just got back from a client who had it on loan. You talk about testosterone and how it plays a huge part in drive, and that there are, I think you list 3 of the biggest decreasers of testosterone, and one of those is caregiving.
Yeah, caregiving and stress. Now, I wrote that book in 2009, and we know even more about testosterone now. Yeah. And, what we know is that it is related to drive, but in really nuanced ways. Like testosterone levels, if you take a blood test, it doesn't account for differences between women with low and high desire. But it is implicated in desire, and more doctors are prescribing testosterone to women off-label to increase desire, along with other hormone replacement, which is a whole nother thing, menopause and desire, which I'm sure we could get into. I mean, I'll confess, not confess because it's no shame. I shouldn't use the word confess. I'm on testosterone myself.
Yeah.
It's part of my menopause hormone replacement therapy. Just this morning, my doctor said, because I got my testosterone levels checked, because you have to do that to make sure they're not too high, which, by the way, doctors who I work with say stay away from pellets because they increase it too fast, right?
Yep.
So I got my levels checked. They're right in the middle. And I told my doctor, and she said, well, how do you feel? I said, honestly, I feel about the same, but, I'm glad, So there's so much nuance to testosterone.
Yes.
But it is partially the factor in desire. And so is cortisol. Because the stress hormone cortisol, when we have it at too high a levels, it has us get into this state where we no longer react to, it's like counterintuitive, too high a stress, which we think of as bad. What it does is it dampens our response to good stressors like sexual arousal, which stress is just a biological change in your body, but we think of it as bad. There's good stress, there's bad stress. But so it's very nuanced, but it's very important. And it's sort of a biological, relational, like there's back and forth with it.
Yeah. So, and I can't remember where I got this from. It's likely, I tell people, whatever I'm saying about sex drive, it's probably come from Dr. Laurie's work. But at this point, I can't remember where my info comes from. But now I'm just gonna forget what I was gonna say.
Is it I think I'm reading your mind. Is it the tank of gas metaphor?
There's that. I draw that at least twice a week. I should have it laminated. I don't know why I don't. But yeah, can you explain that?
Yeah. So in my book, what I say is we have less testosterone than men. And so again, like drive isn't only due to testosterone, but it does have a role. And we have less than men. So think of it as a tank of gas. If you have a half a tank of gas and something like a stressor decreases that tank, it'll take it to empty. Whereas if you start with a full tank of gas and someone stressor decreases it, you're still at half a tank.
Yeah.
So, to me, the biggest way to overcome low drive is to know what it is and to decrease the stressors that are causing it and to learn about responsive desire.
Right. Sometimes when women say, if you take things off my list, I might have a little more room for the things that it seems like you need. And I hear men say a lot that feels very transactional or tit for tat. How would you reframe that?
Well, I would say there is something called chore play, and it's just as important as foreplay.
Yes. Okay.
And, think of it as transactional if you like, but at some level, all relationships are transactional. We get things and we give things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like, oh, do the dishes and I'll have sex with you. So stop thinking of it as a trade, but start thinking it as, this is how I support you so that you can make room on your plate for me and my needs and my sex drive. And, I also would kind of gently confront the man and say, my guess is this man would use these words because I hear it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you mean if I help you more, we'll have more sex? And my response is, let's unpack that word help you, because it assumes that this is her job and you're being a nice guy to help, rather than this being both of your responsibilities that you share.
Right.
So I think there's an attitudinal piece as well that sometimes happens.
Yeah, totally. And so when I first picked up your books, I picked up your book thinking there's something, maybe not totally consciously, but looking back, I see it, thinking there's something wrong with me,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to figure this out. And by the time I was done reading your book, I looked at my husband and I said, my drive is your job too.
That. Yeah. I love that.
And I handed him your book. He's also read Becoming
Okay.
Cliterate. Of all the books I've handed him over the years, I think yours are probably the only ones that he's had lots of positive feedback about.
Oh, that just makes me so happy. And I love that line. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that with clients because it's true. And I don't know if you remember the intro to my book. I started digging into this topic and researching it and then writing about it due to my own lost sex drive when I had little children and a job. And I thought, what's wrong? And I was a therapist and I didn't know. And then I would ask my friends and they all had the same problem. Everyone was saying they had this problem. And I thought, there's got to be solutions out there. And there were, but they were so deeply buried in the literature for scientists and, therapists that they were hard to access for the general public.
Right. Yeah. Yes, despite having a PhD and being a researcher, your books are easy to consume. And I really appreciate that.
Oh,
it's so lovely. And so what you were saying regarding testosterone and or stress, it sounds like for men, there is an example that you say in the book, like that a doctor once said to you, a man could be standing in a pile of elephant feces, see a beautiful woman walk by, still think about sex. And a woman can be on her way to the bedroom with full intentions of having sex, see a dirty sock on the floor, and it's all over.
Yeah.
And I think with that in mind, if we know that stress is going to get in the way of women's drives more than it is men's, then the next logical step is, how do we decrease their stress if having more sex is what you want?
Absolutely. And women, the research, as you know, is so clear. Women have more chronic stress than men, like across all age groups, right? So to me, there's two ways to increase drive: decrease the stress. And also, and I know this is a little different topic, but I also think women would be desiring sex more if they had better sex.
Yeah.
Because there's
more.
a lot of women having really bad sex, painful sex, non-orgasmic sex. And why, not all women, right? But enough that it's like, well, why would you want why would you desire something that's not fun? And the more fun sex you have, the more you want.
Of course. Of course. How do we have better sex?
Communication. Here's my rhyme that I love for this. Masturbate, communicate, lubricate, vibrate.
Masturbate, communicate, lubricate, vibrate.
Yeah, and I can break it all down if you want.
Yeah, let's do it.
Masturbation is, first of all, the more sex you have, including with yourself, the more you want. So that's why. Also, women know how to orgasm when they masturbate. 95% do easily and within minutes. So it's the most empirically supported technique for teaching women how to orgasm. But a lot of times women don't make the bridge. Oh, I know how to do it alone, but I don't do that with a partner. So first masturbate, know what you like, rev up your sex drive. Then you need to communicate what you need to the partner. And then in terms of lubricate and vibrate, we know that most women, many women, do not produce enough natural lube for penetrative sex especially. And, lube is like sex's best friend. And sometimes even just the act of putting on lube, it's like, oh, association in my brain. Wet equals horny. Oh, I'm horny, even if it was just from, external lube. And then vibrate, we know so unequivocally that women who use vibrators have more frequent and easier orgasms. And men who endorse their partner's vibrator use have happier partners, more satisfied partners. So
it sounds like know thyself is a big part of having good sex.
It's the first and most essential step.
Okay. So if this is all the case, how did everybody start faking it?
Porn, the mainstream movies, and I literally just told my class this. I said, I want you to look at movies this week, porn, regular, and I want you to see how many women orgasm from penetration alone. And without any foreplay, lead up, right? And it's good 98%, right? And do you know how many women say that penetration alone is their most reliable route to orgasm?
How many?
0 to 4%. So how did it get this? But we don't have good sex ed. We have horrible sex ed. So women get their images from the media, of course. They see other women having these fabulous orgasms from penetration, and they think, oh, there's something wrong with me. Oh my God, how many times, whether it's desire or orgasm, what's wrong with me? And so they think, I don't want to seem abnormal, and I want him to think he's doing a good job. So they start faking, and 70% of women have faked at one time or another.
Yeah, I try to ask clients if we could create the most perfect sexual experience for you. Forget the movies, forget what you've seen on TV, forget what you've read in books, forget it all. What would it be? And not that long ago, I had a client say, woman with young kids, she said very clearly, we had been working for a while on this topic, and she said very clearly, very quickly, it would be in the closet, in the dark, there would be no foreplay, no kissing. And I said, oh, I haven't seen that in the movies. I said, tell me why. She said, I've got little kids on the other side of that door. I need 2 doors between us. I said, okay. And I looked at him and he said, I can do all of that. But we don't have, I feel like nobody's giving us permission for it to be another way.
Yeah. And I'm surprised at her answer, because
so was I.
she might be one of those women who does orgasm from penetration easily, or who doesn't need a lot of warm up. That's rare, but if that's and that's the point, right? It's like, figure out what you want and what works for you. And that might be her dream might be someone else's nightmare. So I really think that that's a great question that you ask. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there's another thing that I say that I don't sometimes I'm like, I wish I could check this out with Dr. Laurie. And now you're here, so I can. I say to women who do have young kids, our goal is not to get you to the point where your loins are on fire spontaneously. Our goal is to get you to the point where you want to.
100%. Like, I think I love that. And, there's something called the limerence phase, which is an early stage of a relationship. You can't keep your hands off each other. You're having sex constantly. It's hot and heavy. And it's a biological event. It lasts 6 months to 2 years. And then it goes away and people go, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with the relationship? And I say, think about it. Could you raise kids? Could you hold down a job in that stage? No, it gets replaced. It changes. And the goal isn't, you can never get back there, but you can create a sex life that works for the stage you're in. I call the early childhood years the do no harm stage. The goal, the goal isn't that you're going to be super close and hot and a couple. You're going to be creating a family and you're tired and you're stressed and it's a really hard stage. So the goal is to do no harm to the marital relationship, to keep the connection so that when you do get some breathing room, it's still there. And I think that's a mistake people make, is thinking things should feel the same, and they're not going to.
Yeah, I posted something about sex drive in a question box, and one of my friends who had just had a baby 6 weeks prior was like, how do I get my sex drive back? I was like, hang on a minute.
You're not going to for a while, right?
Well, and it does seem like our bodies, if stress gets in the way of drive and lack of sleep gets in the way of drive and caregiving gets in the way of drive, it does seem like our body's way of saying, this is not a good time to have another child.
Exactly. And in fact, breastfeeding decreases vaginal lubrication. And without vaginal lubrication, right, sex is less pleasant, even painful. So it is our body's way of protecting us at times, instead of it, something's wrong with us. Now, that doesn't mean you can't schedule sex, make room and time for it, use lube. But yeah, absolutely. Goal is not, I love that. The goal is not to put your loins back on fire like when you were 18. Yeah.
Well, it does seem like men don't have a problem with their loins being on fire. Is that accurate?
I think up to a point. I mean, I think, men, they have less chronic stress than we do. All of that. And they do seem to have more spontaneous desire, but they also have their own problems. Like, 20% of men in their 20s have erectile dysfunction, 30% in their 30s, it's interesting, 40% in their 40s, 50% in their 50s, and on it goes. And that can decrease sex drive because they're fearful of performance anxiety.
Yeah. So what if, we've been talking a lot about women and that our drives can really plummet, especially once kids come along. What if a woman has a higher drive than her spouse?
Same as if a woman has a lower. Need to talk about it? It's one of those things, like, what if I love going out for pizza and my husband's allergic to cheese? What if I'm a vegetarian and my husband loves steak? Like, we compromise, right? We might bring in, go find a restaurant where they serve both, or take turns, or go out with our friends, whatever. We figure things out. And we somehow, when it comes to sex, there's this idea like we shouldn't. And I think it's the same regardless of who has the lower and higher sex drive. You have to compromise, figure out what's your ideal frequency. Schedule it, figure it, talk about it.
Well, and it's such an emotionally laden, I feel like the less you know about it, the more emotionally laden that conversation is. Yeah, then the more easy it is to take things personally, the harder it is to not get defensive, and then getting to, if we could treat it like pizza and cheese, we would be getting to totally different resolutions and solutions.
And if we had better education, that's how we would do it. Because it is but people are terrified to talk about it, and they do take it personally. But the key to solving sexual problems is getting comfortable talking about them alone or with a therapist.
I'm interested. You have 2 daughters?
I do have 2 daughters.
How did you talk to them about how to talk about sex with their partners?
Well,
how and when and...
Yeah, I didn't always do a great job. I wasn't really a sex therapist till later in their lives. So I made my mistakes just like all parents that I would do differently. But I did make it like I did teach them when they were young. I read them a book and I talked about it. And, I kept the conversation going. It wasn't a one-time thing. One of my daughters, when she had her first serious boyfriend, and I could kind of sense they were moving in that direction, I said, look, we got to talk about 2 things. We need to talk about birth control and we need to talk about pleasure. And let's get you some birth control if you're about to make this decision. And I said to her, she was, in high school, and I said, he's not going to know what to do. He thinks he's going to put his penis in and push it around and you're going to have fun. And that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So here's a book. It wasn't my book because I hadn't written yet. Here's a book called I Love Female Orgasm. I want you to read it so you can tell your partner what you want. Oh, Mom.
Yeah. Mom! I know this mom well. I know it.
Right? But then I would walk by her room and I'd hear her and her friends reading from the book,
Yeah.
So, now what I do is so public and they're adults. So, their friends sometimes call me or they'll post about my book. It's very different than when they were younger. It's no longer this embarrassing thing anymore. Yeah.
But it sounds like you wanted them to prioritize their pleasure.
Yes, I did.
And you talked about that.
Yeah. Yeah, because they weren't going to learn it anywhere else. And they didn't want to hear the details from me. So that's why, giving a good book was a good idea, I thought.
Yeah. What are some ways that people are talking about sex that are not working?
Oh, my God. Almost all of them, right?
Yeah.
Even the words we use. Think about how we use the word sex. It's synonymous with intercourse. And foreplay is just a lead up. Well, that's very privileging of male sexual pleasure, right? We're labeling sex by the act that men orgasm, not women. So so I always say if we privilege female sexuality, we would call foreplay sex and intercourse post-play. But I'm not saying we should privilege anyone's. We shouldn't be privileging one act over others. We use the word vagina to refer to our entire genitals. We're erasing the part of ourselves that gives us the most pleasure, the vulva, the clitoris. The idea of losing one's virginity as if, it's like this terrible loss instead of, something pleasurable and wonderful. They use the term making your sexual debut in Europe, but even that's really focused only on penetration. So I love to use the word making your sexual debut to be your first pleasurable encounter with another person, regardless of the acts. So, we talk about big dicks and lasting all night. Most women, they don't want that. It hurts. We shame masturbation. We hardly talk about sex. Correct. We sexualize people, but we don't give them the tools to have good sex.
We sexualize people, but we don't give them the tools to have good sex. I was picturing somebody listening who would be taken aback at the thought of giving their daughter a book about, how to prioritize her pleasure. But none of us seem to bat an eye at the degree to which women are sexualized.
Right. Right. Look in the movies, the media, magazines, so that contributes to women's seeing themselves as objects. And if it's good for him, it's good for me. Paying more attention to how we look than how we feel.
It feels like a setup.
Yeah, and it's when it comes to women's sexuality, I think it's one of the most deeply ingrained aspects of sexism in our culture. It's so baked into the culture, we don't even notice it. We don't even notice it.
Well, it seems to be setting everyone up for failure.
Yeah, this impacts, men too. They feel pressure to last long and thrust hard, and it sets everyone up for performance anxiety and stress and failure.
Okay. What have we left out today? I feel like we have covered so much, but I could talk to you all day, and I'm trying to be mindful of your time.
Oh, that's so sweet. I think we covered a lot. We could, look, right? I teach a whole class on this, 3-hour lectures once a week for 15 weeks. We're not going to cover it all in 45 minutes, but I think, I hope we've given your listeners enough tidbits and tools to, feel good and learn things. Oh, but I think one thing we didn't cover that I want to is scheduled sexual encounters.
Yes. I'm glad you came back.
So I call them trysts because it's a lot sexier a word. A tryst is a planned meeting between lovers. And when you are tired and you are stressed and you have young kids, as we talked about, you're not going to feel horny. You need to use your responsive desire. It will be good when it gets going, but you have to clear off time for that. And the way to do that is to schedule it. And that also works with drive differences. Like, what's your ideal frequency? Oh, say his is 3 times a week. Hers is like once every 2 weeks. Maybe we settle it once a week, right?
Yep.
And then we say, well, when? And nighttime is the worst time because we're the most tired. Our testosterone is the lowest. Our cortisol is the highest.
Agreed.
So we say, when can this be, right? And we schedule it. And you then think about, like, maybe it's Sunday morning when the kids are at grandma's or in Sunday school or something like that. And you use that time to have a sexual encounter. And what conditions need to be in place? You need to have time to build arousal. You need to be mindful in your body, right? Mind and body connected.
Wrap your brain around that.
You can take the time. So I really, 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 one of the best things for low diminished desire women is scheduled sexual encounters. And sometimes men will say, oh, that's too unromantic. And my response is, well, it's probably more romantic than having no sex, number one. And number two, your thinking sex should be spontaneous, and it never was. I'll say to people, do you remember when you were dating and you were going out on a date and you got dressed, you took a shower, you flirted all night?
You shaved your legs.
Right. And the night ended in sex. That's not spontaneous. That's well orchestrated. And it always was. So we need to let go of this myth of spontaneous sex and spontaneous desire and use planning. Like, look, just like this podcast. We didn't just happen to show up at 1:00 on your platform. We scheduled it and we made it happen. We prioritized it. And scheduling is a way of saying, this is a priority for me.
Yeah. Well, and that it just, I know for sure I came into adulthood with a lot of ideas about how sex should be. And I've worked for a very long time to unravel that. And even just that sex should be at night.
Yeah.
Or
totally
after date night. I at some point I looked at my husband and I said, sex after date nights makes no sense. I feel like I'm, like Ursula, like I've just eaten an incredible amount of food. I had some drinks. I'm tired. I'm bloated. I don't feel, we should be doing this before.
Right. Or separating them. Date nights where sex is off the table and trysts where sex is what we're going to be doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you came back to scheduling. I do feel like a lot of people have resistance to that because they think that that drive should be spontaneous.
Yeah. And those are the myths, right? And these are the things that people don't know that we can tell them that can be so freeing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Well, it was such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for doing this podcast and all you do for women and couples.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, there are 2 questions I did not ask Dr. Laurie that I totally wish I had. 1, can I be your relative? And are you adopting? Also, where do I put my application? She lived up to all my expectations. If you want more, please check out her books, A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex and Becoming Clitorate, which might just be the best book title I've ever heard. Also, I'm hosting an online sex drive workshop on May 21st at 7 p.m. Central, where you'll learn several research-based strategies I use to help my couples in sessions and couples therapy navigate and communicate about their sex lives with a lot less stress. We'll get clear on what you want and need, and you'll leave with really actionable strategies to make this a whole lot less cringy. You can find all my online workshops at micahross.com and links to all the resources we talked about today in the show notes.